What's the biggest misconception that leaders have about their operation and what's actually really performing?
The biggest misconception is leaders walk in a plant, they see it running and assuming everything is going great, right? And then the challenge lays in the detail when you walk in a factory. As you walk through, you start detecting some of those efficiencies. Most likely in a manufacturing environment, you see stoppages on lines, material doesn't flow consistent off a line in the end to get in a warehouse or in a storage operation to get moved to trucks. And when you look along that, there's tools and mechanisms out to help us to detect that. The specific field I'm working in, TPM, Total Productive Manufacturing and Maintenance, looks in those things, and a well-known tool in the supply chain community is the value stream mapping, right? So you use that tool to really map out visually your all operation, and then you look in those opportunities and those losses. And in every manufacturing environment, there's plenty of those because we working and living in real life. And as you look at those, not all the stuff I have on equipment in a factory performs at the ideal or at the designed rate, right? In a supply chain environment, from a cost point of view, you want to eliminate or reduce those losses. So that's what you look in. And then you can go through, you look in the end and you said, I should have 10,000 units per shift coming off the shift, and you get 9,500 units. So where are the missing 500 units? And you lost them somewhere in the process. So the big process there, as you look in, you walk in a factory, you see it running, but does it run for the supply chain at the efficiency you need to run? And there's a big difference, and that becomes the challenge along the supply chain, and that's where loss analysis and loss focus comes in.
So Heiko, you and I have talked in the past about performing Gemba walks, site walks, and tours
Yes.
and facility within your operations. Can you kind of touch a little bit about those Gemba walks and what those look like for you on your end, and where specifically you start in the process?
Gemba walk is an essential part of leadership in a med environment, right? That's your connection to the real production floor. And Gemba is nothing else, meaning spending time off the floor where the work is done, right? Mm-hmm. So you cannot run a factory just out of a boardroom or out of your office. You need to be on the floor, like you said, to understand the pulse. When I go in a factory and do a Gemba walk, I'm starting in the end of the production line, so to speak, on the shipping dock, and walk the process backwards, right? I was lucky enough to have studied with Japanese senseis years ago as I worked for Procter & Gamble, and they taught me that process. And that was very valuable to me, because what it taught me is you look at the product which leaves your dock to your customer, right? So you see, this is what leaves my factory. And then you can look, and you might detect, as you then walk backwards your production process to the front end, you might detect deficiencies, abnormalities, defects. So now you can look, and let's say you see a pallet, and you see a unit on a pallet which gets loaded to a truck, and you see that they're not perfect, right? We all have worked with large companies like Walmart, where you get tracked and measures, look at that stuff and say, why does the top two layers moving on my load unit, right? Shouldn't it be straight? Because you know from the process how it should be. It should be straight. So now as you walk backwards, you can look where the unit is built and might understand, there should be a slip sheet in, but the slip sheet is missing. Or there should be corners on and one of the corners is not there. Or there's a minor misalignment in the process, which triggers in the end customer complaints, or your customer where you ship it to might come back and say, listen, the quality you promised me is not there. But you as the operations, the manufacturing unit, can detect those and then go back and then start addressing those losses, either internally there or get resources to help you on that stuff if that is beyond the capability you have set up in the factory. And so forth as you walk the process. Very valuable because it allows you to look deeper in your process, understand the process, but also see where difficulty starts within your process and losses occur. And then you can target back to the initial conversation. You can start targeting these losses and create better reliability, a better throughput, and better product quality to get to your customer.
Sure. Yeah. So you talk about the gap. So talking about standard work, right? Those processes that you have in place within your facilities. Right. What you end up seeing then in those instances, right, is the gap between standard work and then the actual behavior of your people on the floor. So that behavioral aspect where the hidden tribal knowledge that goes on within the facility itself doesn't necessarily equate itself perfectly to that standard work. Let's touch base there just a little bit. What signals tell you pretty quickly that there's some hidden inefficiencies there, that maybe some of those standard work items that you originally intent aren't being followed as clear?
Yeah, so that's a good point. But it goes back to your Gemba walk, and you need to see it on the floor. But a big portion you see in manufacturing is training, right? And levels of training might be different. So you have created standard work. How was that standard work conveyed to the operator who actually performing the work, right? Is it consistent? You can track and measure those, right? In a continuous flow environment, you have measurements like takt time, where you look at that throughput and you know, okay, every minute and a half, there should be a pallet rolling off the line, right? You could technically, and when you work with companies like Toyota, you will see that they have a takt time, right? They know every 56 seconds a Corolla rolls off the production facility in Georgetown, Kentucky, right? Why is it? Because they are set up. That's a continuous flow. Now, in another large consumer goods company, it's a little bit more difficult because none of us sitting there and counting 1,200 bottles a minute, right? So there's a counter. But again, you look for the best countable unit size in the end to try to understand where that should be. And if you start seeing a deviation, you know something is not working according to the laid out standard. And that's where you can tie in and look from a loss analysis point to really help you to understand, what do I need to do? How do I need to address the deficiency? And is there an opportunity for improvement? Are there tools in my TPM portfolio, in my continuous improvement portfolio, I can pull out? There's plenty of them, right? We can do Kaizens for improvement. We can do case studies there. We can do problem solvings. We can do technical improvements, work with the technical community to work on those. But in the end, it goes back to standard work and deviation from standard work. But you need to skill your eye to see. I mean, there's books out there, they called Learn to See, where you have to go out or have a sensei who works with you in the process to really help you to understand. It's like, look at this, try to understand this. Are people following the process as described? Sometimes when I go the first time in a factory and look at that stuff, I look for the standard work documentation at the workplace and pull that out, read through that quickly, and then stay there for a while and observe. And I mean, it's not uncommon for those of us who worked, especially with the Japanese, with JIPM culture, to stand in a spot for half an hour or an hour and just observing an observation and taking notes. But those types of phenomena teach you a lot, where you can, to your point, look at the standard work and then come back and say, okay, it says you should move that to the right side, but every fourth time he is moving it to the left side. Why? Right? And then you can engage in a conversation. You will be surprised how many times you find in those conversations that actually the operator has a better way to do that. We just not capturing this, right? So there's our chance from a continuous improvement tying in and shaping time off, right? And time is becoming a very important factor, right? So most of us, supply chain time, process time, we're counting days or hours, right? In a continuous improvement environment, what I was taught in the past by my sensei, we should look at seconds.
I love that you kind of teed up the takt time conversation. So, and you're kind of already going to my next question, which is, how granular are you actually getting and need to get to uncover actual meaningful loss within the facility, where companies either, and then also with that, do companies either overdo it or they don't go far enough, in your opinion, in finding those hidden losses?
When you look in that, you should always go to the smallest possible time increment you have, right? So, and I learned it from a point. So think about, you do a changeover, right? You're changing from product A to product B, right? It takes 6 minutes and you find a way to get quicker, and all what you cut out is 10 seconds, right? So if you go to your boss and say, hey boss, I found a great improvement, I saved 10 seconds. How impactful is that? It's like, well, okay, it's good, right? Now, think different. 6 minutes is 360 seconds, right? You go to your boss and say, boss, I can get us from 360 seconds changeover to 350 second changeover. That feels like a different number. That feels like a lot of time saved, right? And the impact really in a highly sufficient operation, the changes you can do, you need to count in seconds, because a tenth of a minute, right, does not feel a lot, right? But 6 seconds, 5 seconds is a lot of time if you multiply that with 360 days of operation, right? And 24 hours of operation and 7 days a week. So that time adds up, and that really creates a different mindset. And you need to go in there. A lot of times, from your point, when you look at losses, we're looking really at larger pieces of losses. But as you get in your operations more sufficient, the incremental increases are not that huge anymore. So the industry there, as you get better, it will be more difficult. And that's where automation can help. And that's where some other tools and methodology can help and benefit us in using supply chain opportunities.
The data is critical, right? But it's also about the right level of visibility on what's actually happening on the floor. You touched on it with the associate piece, and I feel like, at least in my operations and where I've seen it the most, is roughly 60% of our overall process improvements come from an associate, just telling us exactly how they're doing the process today and how it's more efficient than the SOP that was originally written. When you did a walk, can you tell me about a time where you were doing a Gemba walk in particular, and you were able to do a deeper analysis? And what was the first thing that was obvious when you were doing that walk on a process that was broken?
So when I walked in operation and looked at processes, let's say loading a truck in a warehouse, right? Things you're finding is it's easy to say fill up a truck, load a truck. There's 32 pallets fitting on a normal trailer, right? When you load that, but as you go in the warehouse and look there, where the warehouse is situated and your material is, it's not in a straight line. So as you load the truck, people need to go all over, right? So there is efficiencies built in, and you can see them very obvious. I talked before, you can go in other areas where you can try to understand how the process goes and analyze and then say, why didn't you follow the standard work? Why is that not working for you? What should be different? I always try to include, when I have an observation, to detect from the operator who is doing that, why did they deviate from whatever is the described standard in the area? And there's a lot of insight you can gain from there.
Yeah. So what looked like potentially then seconds per unit turned into maybe hundreds of seconds, right? Annually.
Yes.
I love that you also, going back to those Gemba walks, starting on the outbound dock, a small delay on the outbound dock can then have a much greater impact on the overall facility because it's a cascading effect. And
Correct.
what that impact then can draw into your manufacturing line and then into your warehouse and facility and storage. Where do you usually see that imbalance there and what that looks like?
Yeah, you see a lot of that imbalance when you walk a line, right? So my prime example is when engineering designs a line, right? Engineering designs for the optimal flow, right? But the equipment we have is not necessarily 100% synchronized. So what you get from an engineering point of view is like what we call accumulation tables or towers between process steps, right? Which is, in supply chain terms, work in process inventory, right? So I creating that to decouple the operations to drive them through. But from a supply chain flow perspective, that's a big loss, right? I have just not finished. I cannot sell to the customer. I need to get through. As I studied with my sensei, part of their process was you should eliminate all that. You should directly tie that together and then work from the back to the front to improve your process, right? So as you look in, lay out the ideal process, you start seeing those inventory buckets built in. If you do your value stream mapping correctly, that they should shrink, and then your process runs quicker and more flawless, and then you can detect those issues. Is there a quality defect baked in the process I need to eliminate? Do I need to drive further improvement in the process to help me really to get through the process quicker? So there's a lot of opportunities you see therein, but the biggest issue in the overall supply chain through the biggest loss is really work of in process inventory we have created to mask or band-aid, like I like to say, the whole process to appear I'm running, but really I'm running disconnected, and it creates a ripple effect. Because when you tie that together to the earlier point, seconds become minutes, minutes become 30 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes. And the next thing you know is like the front of your process is done and you still have 30 minutes to run in the end of the process to get a changeover done, right? If you are in a food environment, that becomes a critical path because there's requirements from the FDA, from the USDA that you have to clean the line before you change over. So now you created problems, potential quality issues in your process because your line is not clear. So there's all correlations built in that process. You need to watch out. That's all potential losses or true losses you should try to eliminate.
I feel like you potentially blew some brains there when you said inventory is a waste or right and it's a loss. Can you
Right.
share just a little bit more about how that is a loss, right? Because most people see inventory as a critical aspect of the supply chain piece, but especially when it's staged inventory that you're just sitting on, how that's a loss and how that's costing them money.
Yeah, so when you look at inventory is your product you haven't sold to your customer yet, right? So you've put money, time, and energy in, created a value, but you're not reimbursed for that value, right? So the money flow is not back. So in your balance sheet, you have spent, but you didn't get any receipts coming back. So as you look in the process, in the ideal balance sheet, your inventory should be extremely low, right? So the ideal supply chain is just in time delivery. You produce it, you get it on a truck, the truck leaves, you're getting paid for it. Now, not all operations, not all products allow us to do that, right? So the desire needs to be to keep that inventory position pretty low. But what you will see, especially when you're in the field like I am in terms of continuous improvement and TPM, you go in factories early on and you see warehouses full of product and you talk to the folks and look at the sticker on the pallets, and some of that stuff is 6 months old. So you know, working in supply chain, that 6 months old inventory, there is stuff produced 6 months ago, which is standing there and still not at the customer. It costs you money. That's tied up dollar amounts not coming back to you. How often in an early environment have you detected walking out on the production floor and one product doesn't run very well, and then operations decide we switch over to another one because we need to run. And then as you look in that detail, you're running, but you're running the wrong product. So you're creating inventory. There is no outlet for that product, but I'm running. So my production cost looks pretty decent, but my output is the wrong because I have the wrong product available.
Sure, sure. And then once you have it in inventory, you got to count it, you got to check it, you got to do inventory quality checks on it. That's all time, money, and effort that's going into it. So all of that is an additional cascading effect to your point, right? That one simple miss, whether it's on the outbound dock or not, what that causes down the line from a manufacturing line perspective, and then how that bleeds into the warehouse. It's all, in correlation and sync together, which is so interesting and fascinating to me. If there's one thing that you could leave somebody right now who's on the call listening, that's a manufacturing leader, what should they rethink after this conversation? And what would that be? What would that one piece of advice be to them?
Be the leader, step up, help the people, help your production facility of getting more efficient and listening to the people on the floor who are doing the process. Have those frequent conversation, observe the process and understand where you, with your process understanding, your process is not running as smooth as you want to. There's your tie in where you can say, I need to work on some improvement. I need to do something to get better.
It's okay as a leader to block off an entire day, to stand in one location and to observe the process of your people.
Yeah, it's very important to be on the floor. So I usually coach my plant leaders. You should plan between an hour and an hour and a half a day to spend time on the floor, on the production floor, getting out of the meeting room, getting out of your office, getting out of the conference room, and get out there. And it's very important because people see that as you, as the individual employee, are important to them. Because my leader comes down there and has a conversation. It can be a casual conversation. It can be your walk through the line, recognizing some of your employees doing some good stuff and reinforcing the good stuff. It could be a safety conversation. It could be a quality conversation. It could be just going out and say, guys, I saw last shift, you did a great job on getting this product out. Thank you for doing that. It could be a product lunch where you go out to the team who did that and have a conversation. tell the team the praise and help them to understand how important that was for the business to bring the product to market or get the stuff out in time. There's a lot of interactions you can do on the floor, which makes you a valuable leader, but makes you also being respected by your folks on the floor because they see you on the floor. The worst thing you can do as a site leader or as an operations leader in an environment, even as an ops director, just managing from the boardroom or managing from the office. People want to see you on the floor. People want to have the conversation. There's a lot of us and insights you can gain from talking to the folks on the floor and seeing what your process is. And it skills your eye as you look at the process because you might be out in that area 5 days ago and there was chaos. And now you come, it's going smooth. There's a conversation you can have and say, what did you do different that it now looks different than on Monday as I was there? So there's a lot of great opportunities there.
Even though you are in charge of the facility, right? To sit there and say, hey, I don't understand why you're doing it that way. Or maybe I don't know. Can you teach me? I learned more, I always felt like, when the associate was teaching me how they did the job, or the young manager how they did the job, because it was so much more insightful, one, for myself, but I also learned so much more because then I found errors in our own SOPs potentially, right, that could have corrected those things. Your operation isn't necessarily losing money, right, in an obvious way. I feel like it's losing money in small, repeatable inefficiencies that are across the line. And those inefficiencies then build up into a massive loss at the end of the day. But they're all little ones, right? And their little ones build up over time, and that's what we end up seeing and correcting. But if you're really super efficient, to your point, right, and being on top of these efficiencies all the time, then you're catching those little things before they become bigger errors. Correct?
Correct. Absolutely correct. And we always say improvement is a small step at a time, but losses is also a small step at a time, right? So there's a lot of those out there. And like you said, they're accumulating and they can, in some instances, accumulate pretty fast. So you want to stop on top of those, stay on top of those losses and really get a handle on that and eliminate those because seconds becomes minutes, becomes hours, right? And for all of those times, there's a dollar value behind. You want to look in and want to see what can be done.